Somebody keeps sending me the same text every night. Did you lock the door? The first time those words appeared on my screen, my entire body immediately tensed up. I was alone in my studio apartment, lying in bed. The worst part about living in a studio apartment on the 7th floor is that if somebody did come in, there'd be nowhere to run. Without even thinking, I jumped out of bed and ran straight towards the door. It was locked. Of course it was locked. Just a moment after I checked, I heard someone outside, softly humming a song. I held my breath, listening if they came closer to my door. But then I heard a key turn. Next door. It was just a neighbor. The next morning, all the paranoia and fear were gone as soon as I looked out my window at the lively town underneath. The sun was shining bright, the roofs of the houses were colorful, and the lawns nice and green. There were children walking to school, people driving down the roads on their bikes, or going inside the bakeries and shops. This must be the safest place in the world. Even though I was looking down on them, I knew that I was at the bottom of the chain. New in town, but ready to climb. At least, that's what I had in mind when I moved here. Unfortunately, everyday life and a lack of discipline often get in the way. I often imagined owning one of those beautiful homes. I was told that if I worked hard enough, I would be able to afford one of them soon enough. But I wasn't so sure anymore. Lately, I'd been thinking of moving away, maybe going back to my parents. Right as that thought crossed my mind, my doorbell rang. Joe was there to pick me up. He rang my door every morning to pick me up for work. We both had jobs at the local newspaper, and after realizing that we lived on the same street, we started walking together every morning. Not because we were terribly close or anything like that. Joe was nice and all, but I think we only started walking together because we were both too polite to say that we'd rather be alone in the morning. We hardly ever got past the most basic small talk. I know exactly 4 things about Joe. He is 61, which is more than twice my age. He was married to a man named Mark for 20 years, but is not anymore. He loves cats, but didn't want to get one because his apartment is too small. The 4th is more of a guess. He moved here to start over, like me. It was Wednesday, so we'd already used up most of the regular small talk this week. The weather had been the same all week. There hadn't been anything particularly spectacular in the news, and I hadn't met many more people. I think Joe pitied me because I was young enough to start over, but seemed to be awful at making friends. This might be another assumption, though. Our conversations never got that deep. Maybe that's the reason I showed him the text. He frowned for a split second but calmed his face just as fast. Did you tell anyone about this? I shook my head. No. Maybe it was sent to me by accident. He nodded. Seems likely. Don't let it freak you out too much. He smiled as a kind father does, but instead of calming me down, it felt like someone had punched my gut. The workday went as always. I spent most of my days spell checking articles, never writing any of my own. Joe had to work longer that day, so I walked home alone. My dinner was already waiting on my doorstep for me. I ate, watched some television, and went to bed. It was a quiet, usual evening until the clock turned 11:20, and I received the text of the night before. Did you lock the door? This time I decided to text back. Who is this? The response came after a few seconds. Philip. My stomach turned, and the phone slipped from my hand. Philip was the name of my little brother. He had been dead for 2 years. It felt too absurd while simultaneously too real. Of course, this wasn't my dead brother texting me, but just reading his name was enough to shatter me entirely from the inside. I never gotten over what happened to him. My little brother was 15 years younger than me. When he died, he was only 7. I was 23 then, and had moved back home temporarily after college. Tears formed in the corner of my eyes. I shoved my nails deep inside the palm of my hands, a nervous habit I'd formed. Maybe someone was pranking me. Maybe a different Philip was texting me. Or maybe I was hallucinating. But Joe had seen the other text, so it had to be real. I went back to the door and rattled it like crazy. I knew it was locked. That the door wouldn't open, but I couldn't stop trying for some reason. Finally, exhausted, I left the door alone and went to bed. Plagued by nightmares of my little brother, it simultaneously felt like the longest and shortest night. The next morning, when I walked up to Joe, I noticed he wasn't alone. A young man was standing with him, chatting him up lively. I even caught a smile on Joe's face. "Good morning, May. You look terrible," Joe said. "Didn't sleep well," I responded. I looked at the other guy, but he didn't look back. He was quite handsome, but his eyes looked just as bloodshot as mine that day, and it looked like he had some bruises on his arm. "Got another text?" I nodded. "I'm not sure it's by accident anymore." "What kind of text?" The new guy suddenly asked and quickly added, "Sorry, don't mean to be nosy. This is Louis. I met him yesterday. He just started working at the printer." Joe explained. "I'm also your next door neighbor, I think. At least I was told the girl next door worked at the paper too. Did you make all that noise yesterday?" He laughed nervously. "I thought my new neighbor was a woman. I heard her humming in the hallway." Louis's face turned as red as Joe's hair. "Yeah, no. That was just a visitor." Joe and I exchanged a quick look, but then the three of us started walking to work. After a few minutes of silence, Louis asked, "So what is this whole text thing about?" I started chewing my lip, wondering if I should tell him. "Somebody keeps texting me if she locked the door," Joe answered for me. "When did this guy get talkative?" "That's odd." Louis scratched his head. "It's always locked, right?" "Of course, every night." I planned on walking home alone after work, but then I heard someone call my name. It was Louis. "Want to walk home together? Joe told me to catch up with you. He has to work longer." "You two seem to get along quite well," I said. I didn't even mean to, but I think I sounded slightly sarcastic. "Afraid I'm gonna steal your best friend?" Louis joked, and I actually had to laugh. "Kinda." Louis smiled. "He told me I remind him of his son. He was around my age." "Was?" I asked. Louis nodded. "Car crash. Joe made it. His husband and son didn't." I felt a sting inside of my chest. Poor Joe. "Was he the one driving?" I asked. He nodded again. "Was it his fault?" Louis shrugged. "We all have a past, right?" I didn't say anything until he suddenly grabbed my arm. The entire atmosphere shifted in a matter of a second. "What's yours, May?" I looked into his eyes and all of the former friendliness was gone. I wasn't sure if what I was seeing was anger or fear. I tried to free my arm, but he wouldn't let go. We were only a few houses away from home, and I suddenly did not like the idea of us walking in there together. He probably caught the look of fear on my face because he suddenly let go. "I'm sorry," he whispered and looked around the street. There were no other people outside. I know I'm not supposed to ask, but that text you get about the door is so weird. Why would they ask you if the door is locked if they're the ones locking it? And why are they locking it only at night? What is it we and the other people really do here in town?" She comes to me almost every... Now I was the one grabbing his arm. Stop talking. We walked up to the 7th floor. Dinner was waiting at both of our doorsteps. I wouldn't have gone up with him, but I knew he wouldn't do anything. None of us would. That night, I slept through the text, but was woken up when I heard someone scratching on my door from the outside. You didn't lock the door. I heard a familiar voice speak. My body tensed up, and my breathing stopped. The doorknob rattled. You can call for help, but it will be too late. Somebody must die. I shivered. That's what the intruder said before opening the door and walking up to the little Phil. Stop! I screamed and walked up to the door. Why are you doing this to me? I shouted and punched the door. Why? Then I heard a loud bang from the wall behind me. It sounded like my neighbor was hitting his fists against it. Don't! I heard Louis' muffled voice from behind that wall, but I ignored him. I want to leave, I shouted, and then I heard the lock turn from outside. The door opened, and in front of me stood a woman. I didn't know her real name. She'd introduced herself as Miss M. I'd met her many times before, and every time she looked calm and friendly. She was supposed to appear like a therapist, one you could trust. But I knew it was just her shell. She tilted her head. Oh, May, you'll never make progress like this. Where do you want to go? Home, to my family, I cried. Oh, to your brother's grave and your parents who will forever rightfully blame you? She was right. There was no other place for me to go. This town was something out of a dream, a place that accepts anyone with nowhere to go. They provide you with an apartment and a job, and if you work hard and fit in with the community, they give you chances to grow and become even better. Do you remember what we told you when you moved here? I nodded. I will never leave and I will never disobey. I clenched my fist. But why were you sending me those texts? To remind you. We had a feeling you weren't happy. You weren't grateful. We wanted to remind you of your past. My past? I'd just been back from college for a short time. I wasn't ready to get serious about life yet. My parents were gone for the night and asked me to watch my brother. I didn't think it would be a problem if I went over to my friend's house for just an hour. Philip was fast asleep in bed. I hadn't realized that I didn't lock the door before leaving. Did you make Louis ask me about that? Miss M smiled. I thought the two of you could connect. He's blaming himself for dead children as well. She chuckled. I didn't respond to that. Whatever happened couldn't have really been Louis' fault, because he would be at prison and not here. They want us to believe it's our fault, so we will stay. But he found us, and we are here to give all of you a second chance at life. I took a deep breath. I know, and I appreciate that. When the citizens stay long enough, they really get turned. When they move into their house, their brains are washed so thoroughly that Miss M and the others in charge can do whatever they want with them. I realize how terrible it sounds, but when I came here, I really thought I didn't deserve a decent life. It was surreal enough to feel better than death. No, you don't. You know you can think about leaving, but you never really will leave. You will just make things a bit harder for us. I swallowed. There was someone else in the hallway. Backup. She usually brings someone with her. Step 1 is easy. Me coming here to talk to you, sending you some silly texts. Part 2 is more physical. And part 3 is something you never want to witness. You can't use your second chance when you're buried underneath the town. Do you want to continue to part 2? I shook my head. She was right. If I just did what I was supposed to, things went smoothly for me. I didn't have to worry about the regular things in life. I don't have to buy my own food, make sure I have a job, or try hard to earn forgiveness. Everyone here has done something. Everyone has a past. As if she was reading my mind, she smiled once more and got ready to leave. But there was one thing I couldn't shake off. Miss M, how do you know what the intruder said to my brother? Did you make that up? She turned around one more time. May, I never lie, and I do not like questions.